Greetings, and in this short video presentation we're going to see how we go about creating a virtual install of Fedora server using VirtualBox. So we begin this lab by ensuring that our VirtualBox program is opened up, and we're going to go to the taskbar and we're going to click on the new icon. This opens up the Create Virtual Machine wizard. On the first screen of the wizard, we want to make sure we give our install a user-friendly name. I'm calling this one Fedora Server. For the type of operating system, make sure we pull down and select Linux. And for the version, we choose Fedora 64-bit. Once we have the information inputted correctly, we just click on the Next button. And from here, we're going to select the amount of RAM we want this virtual machine to have. I like to use 2 gigabytes for all my servers. So where it says 1024, I have changed that to 2048 megabytes or 2 gigs. Now I'm going to go ahead and click on the Next button. Now we're going to go ahead and accept the default, and we're going to create a virtual disk now. We're going to go ahead and say Create. Now in this next window, we're going to accept the default of creating a VDI disk file type. And we're going to click on Next. And from here, we're going to select the storage or the physical hard disk as being dynamically allocated. And from here we're going to click Next. And now we're going to change this 8 gig partition to 60 gig. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and say Create. And now the virtual machine has been created. Our next step is to install the operating system into the virtual machine. And we do this by going up into the taskbar of VirtualBox and clicking on the Start button. On this Select Startup Disk window, we click on the folder icon, and we're going to browse over to the location to which we saved our image of Fedora Server. And I'm going to go ahead and double click it, and that loads in the path, and now we can click on the Start button. On this first window of the installation process, we can just hit Enter, and the installation process will begin. Where the media check pops up, we can just hit the Escape key on our keyboard, and it will continue on with the installation process. Now the GUI installation actually begins, and on this first window, we have to select our language. And to get to the Continue button, we have to scroll down using the scroll bar on the right. I've selected English. I'm going to go ahead and click on Continue. And from here we have to select the installation destination. You'll notice we have this orange icon here. If we click on that, all we're doing here is making sure that our 60 gig partition that we created for the virtual machine actually exists and it has a check mark. Now, to continue on from here, we have to scroll up with the scroll bar on the right to get to the Done button. And from here, we can go ahead and scroll back down one more time, and we can click on the Begin Installation button. Now the installation begins, but before we get too far along with the installation, we must go ahead and set the root password. Now to do this, I'm going to click where it says the root password has not been set, and now I'm going to type in my root password. Once my root password has been set, I'm going to go up to the top and click on the Done button. That brings me back to the previous screen. Now the installation process will continue uninterrupted. From here on out, the installation will continue on its own, but since I allocated 2 gigabytes of RAM, the installation will be a pretty smooth process. If you installed using just 1 gigabyte of RAM, you may see a pause, especially when it gets to the 100%. Do not interrupt the installation. Just be patient, and when it gets ready, it will continue on with finishing the installation process. Now, once the installation process has completed, you have the option to go ahead and reboot. But before we do that, we need to unmount the ISO image for Fedora Server. And we do this by going up to Devices. We go to Optical Disk, and we remove the check mark next to Fedora Server DVD the ISO image. Just uncheck it. Now it wants to ask you, are you sure you want to force an unmount? And we're going to go ahead and force this unmount. Now once we've done that, when we reboot, the installation will no longer look to the device or the DVD source to continue on with the installation. It will look at the hard disk files or the installation that we created on the hard disk. I'm going to go ahead and say reboot, and now the installation will continue. Now if it hangs here, and it has a tendency to hang here, what we can do is we can just go up to the corner and click on the close button, and now we have the option to power off the machine. Go ahead and say OK to that. And now we can restart the machine and it will continue on booting up for the first time. Fedora Server, by its default, will be installed using what's called a minimal install, which means we won't have a GUI desktop until we install one. So we're going to go ahead and log on now as root. And we're going to use the root password that we created during the installation process. The default behavior of all Linux operating systems is you cannot see the password as you type it in from the command prompt. That is the default behavior. Now, the first thing we have to do before we can actually install the GUI desktop is update Fedora Server with the latest packages. And to do that, we're just going to type in dnf space update. And we just hit enter. And in just a moment, Fedora Server will begin the update process. Now during this update process, you must be patient. Everything that we do in Linux has to be downloaded. There's no getting around this. So during this process of running this update, we will be queried at least once, maybe twice, to say OK to continuing on with the update process. So I'm just going to type in Y, and I'm going to hit enter, and now the downloading of the packages will continue. Again, you must be patient. This can take some time. You'll notice that we're actually doing the downloading, and now after we're done with this, there will be the installation. Then after that, there will be the verification. So be patient. Now, this is the second response where it wants to ask, is it okay to continue on? And again, I'm going to type in Y for yes and hit enter. Here the upgrading process continues, and it will pause occasionally depending on the size of the package. But over to the right, you can see the number of total packages that have to be upgraded, and you can also see the number of packages that are currently being upgraded. So this gives you an indicator of how long it's going to take. So after the download, the installation, the cleanup, and then the verification, we are brought back to the root prompt. And from here, we're going to go ahead and do a reboot. I recommend that you do a reboot after every major download, upgrade, or installation of any program, as this will allow the operating system to settle down and reload everything correctly. We can perform the reboot just by using the reboot command at the command prompt, and I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. So after the reboot has completed, we are brought back to our logon screen, and again we're going to log on as root, and we're going to type in our root password. So now I'm back at the root prompt, and we are ready to begin the installation of the Fedora Workstation desktop. Now the command to install the Fedora Workstation desktop is dnf space -y space group install, all one word, space, in quotes, Fedora Workstation, close quotes. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And now the installation process for the GUI desktop will begin. Again, we can see that there are a total of 915 packages that have to be downloaded and installed for this particular package to be installed correctly. So again, I encourage everyone to be patient and allow it to continue uninterrupted. Once the Fedora workstation has been installed correctly, we can go ahead and do a reboot. And during this reboot, the process should be complete and we should be brought up to a GUI desktop so we can continue on with the rest of the installation. But that may not be the case. We'll have to wait and see. So I'm going to go ahead and type in reboot and we'll see what happens. So Fedora server has rebooted and it did not come up to the GUI desktop. It came back to the command prompt. I've gone ahead and logged on as root, typed in my password, and now I'm back at the root prompt. So what we've got to do now is type in a couple of more commands to help the installation find the packages that it needs to boot to the GNOME workstation desktop. Now what we're going to do is type in the command that's going to set the path statically so that each time Fedora server does reboot or starts up for the first time, it will find the packages that it needs to take us up to the GNOME workstation desktop. To set the static path for the GNOME workstation desktop, I've typed in echo space in quotes exec space /usr /bin /gnome -session close quotes space greater than space atili /period XINITRC. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. That brings me back to the command prompt. Now all I have to do is type in the command start X and I should be booted to the GUI desktop for workstation. So once you come up to the workstation desktop, this is GNOME, you will be prompted to answer some questions about some different preferences you have for your language, your keyboard, and whether or not you want to have privacy or do any error reporting. All that's in the lab. Just step through it real quick. And what I'm going to show you now is how to stop Fedora server from logging you off after 5 minutes of inactivity. We begin by going up over here to the power button, and I'm going to go down here to the system utilities icon, and I'm going to click on that. That's going to bring up all settings, and underneath all settings I just click on the power icon, and underneath where it says power savings, I'm going to pull down the window and I'm going to select never, and that will stop Fedora server from logging me off after 5 minutes of inactivity. Now the last thing we need to talk about before we end this video tutorial is how do we properly shut down and exit the operating system. Now this goes for any virtual machine, whether it's Linux, Windows, whatever it is. We have to shut down gracefully, and the way we do that is we go up here to the power button and we go to the next power button, and from here we can select either power off or restart. This is how you do it correctly. What you don't want to do is go up here to the X up here in the corner of the control management console for either VirtualBox and or VMware, and if you click on that you can power off this machine. Well, that's no different than walking behind a physical machine and pulling out the power plug from the power supply. It does not do the operating system any good, and what happens is your file system is going to become corrupted, and eventually you're not going to be able to get the operating system to respond at all. So make sure that you power off your virtual machines just the same way you do a physical machine, and that is gracefully. Well, that concludes everything we have for this short video presentation. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact your instructor, and I'll see you in another video.